Hey, this is Thomas back with Hendricks and Hardwoods. We're getting ready to start a table. This custom table is going to be 10 feet long, almost as close to 2 inches thick as I can get it, and 4 feet wide. Stay tuned. One thing to remember when you're working with bigger chunks of wood, I'm not sure why, but they always get more staples. So I don't have an outfeed table. It was along that wall right there. But again, we're taking that wall out, we're moving it 20 feet. But these boards are 12 feet and above in length. And it's really important to have an outfeed table from your table saw or from your miter saw. Because if you don't, you're trying to hold right here. If you push down, it can slide in through and you can chop your finger off. How my dad lost his finger. I'm trying not to follow the same pattern. Alright, so something else that's super important to remember when you're choosing your wood and you're cutting down your ends. Like I said, these are 12-foot boards and we need our table to be 10 feet. So, make sure that you always cut your first cut to be at least to this line, to your furthest crack. If it's not at your furthest crack, you're going to start to see cracks at the end of your table. And then make sure you check both sides, because on that side I only had a crack about 6 inches from, or 4 inches from the end. This one I've got it about 1.5 feet from the furthest crack. So just double check your ends, make sure that you got a good board on both sides. Alright, if you notice on this part, we've got rot on this end, and over here on this end, we've got a really bad waned edge, which means that this was the edge of the tree, a live edge. So, my thought process on this is I'm going to measure right here and see how close I can get to the waned edge. So it looks like it's about 19.5, we'll call it 20. Then we're going to go to this edge, and this edge comes down almost 3 feet. So, if we measure in the middle of these, bear with me here, you can see that we only have 8 feet of clearance. So I'm going to have to choose either the waned edge or this rot here. So the next thing that I look at is how deep it is. Cut it so that we get a straight edge here. So if we cut it, all the rot out, we're looking at about 1.5 inches that we're going to have to cut at its deepest point. Let me just make sure there. Yeah. At its deepest point, we're going to have to cut 1.5 inches. On the wane, we're going to have to cut almost 2 inches. So we're going to cut off the waned edge and we're going to leave the rot on. Alright, so after I cut it, and I cut off what we're left with. So we cut all the bad cracks in there, came over here, and we cut out this waned edge. What we're left with is just that little smidgen that we're going to have to cut off. But it's on the same side as the rot, so when we cut it through the table saw, it'll all disappear. Alright, next step, now that I got them all cut into 124-inch increments, is we're going to run it through a planer. Now this is 8-quarter wood, which means it's about 2 inches thick. So we're going to try to keep it as thick as possible. So hopefully we only have to do 1 or maybe 2 passes on each side. Alright, so if you notice here, you can see all of these little lines here. Now these lines can be caused, but in your planer, if your planer is all gunked up, it has these rollers that act like teeth, and if they grab the wood. And if those rollers are gunked up and have a lot of sap or sawdust, especially if you work with a lot of pine, which I do, then those rollers can get crap in between them and not have enough grip to grab the board. So it doesn't pull through evenly and you get those little wavy chunks. So take off this shroud to see if that's the problem. Alright, so if you look, you can see that under all of these blades, there's sap, sawdust mixed with sap. And that's keeping the blades from cutting, it could be causing some of those things. Now the next step is we're going to have to take this shroud off and take a look at the rollers. Alright, so another way that you can do this is you can just duck down here, and if you get below the level of the planer, maybe you can stick my phone under there, you can see the rollers underneath the planer. And when we look at them, none of the planer teeth are gunked up. So it's not the rollers, which means it's just these blade cutters. What to do is we're going to have to get a Torx head, and we're going to have to take these out, and then we're going to have to get a wire scrub brush and scrub those clean, which sucks, but that's what you get for working with pine. Alright, so when you're taking these planer blades, I've got gunk in here, right? When you flip this guy over, this planer head cutter, you'll see that there's a little bit of sawdust there and there. So when I flip it, I know it doesn't seem like very much, but when I flip it, if I don't get that off, you can see that it doesn't sit as tight as the other one. Just a little bit. And that little bit is going to create you about an hour more sanding than you need to, because that will be a deeper groove than the other ones, and then you have to go back and smooth it out. Just a tip. And get it looking as pristine as possible. And do the same thing to all four sides before you do it. Another thing to remember is where you rotate your blades. So on helical or spiral cutter heads, most of them are going to have these square heads, and this one has it labeled with a JT. And all you do is you take that and you swap it. Make sure that they're all swapped on the same side. The way I rotate mine is I do it all the way around. So I started here, I put them here. Just make sure you have them all oriented the same way so they're all the same sharpness. And make sure you get all the sawdust and crap off of both the blade and the blade base before you put it back together. Alright, so this is day 2. Got the planer all fixed, blades switched out, and I planed everything all at once on both sides. So now the next step of this process is to figure out which side you want to be your face, because you want to plane your face side as your last. So do I like this side more or the other side? And a lot of this will depend, especially when you're working with walnut, on what your customer likes, because you'll have boards that look like this with a lot of blonde butternut in it, and you'll have a lot of boards that look black. So figure out what your customer wants and plane your face side last. Alright, so I think we got it figured out. Really like the butternut in this, and Angie, who's my customer, also really likes the butternut. I feel like this piece, since it's the widest and it's got the most texture to it, we'll put that in the center of our table. This piece right here, since it's so dark, will probably be the post, and we'll go from there. I'm pretty excited. It looks pretty good. All right, so we got them all figured out. The top side is laying upright, but before we move on to the jointer problem. So the jointer will only take off about 1/16 of an inch. If I grab my tape measure here, you can see that this wane or live edge comes out to almost 3/4 of an inch. With these boards being 10 feet long and weighing about, I don't know, 50 pounds a piece, I don't want to go through the joiner 15 times. So we have this nifty little tool, a track saw. What we're going to do is we're going to line up this track saw so that it cuts out this wane, and we'll line it up from the top to the bottom. Now this is important. You're going to want to make sure that however much you take off in the middle of your wane is how much you're going to take off at the end of your wane, or at the end of your board. That way when you put your boards in, your boards aren't going to be crooked and bigger on one end than the other end. Especially for the centerpiece, I want it to be visually straight across on all sides, which you wouldn't get if you just ran it through the joiner.